My name is Natalia Walton. Welcome. I am the Graduate Assistant Coordinator for the Center for Identity and Inclusion, as well as working for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We want to welcome you by first giving a land acknowledgement. I apologize. Um, We honor and acknowledge that we are here on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and the Ute Nations. This area, specifically the confluences of the Platte and Cherry Creek rivers, was the epicenter for trade, information sharing, planning for the future community, family, and ally building, as well as conducting healing ceremonies for over 45 indigenous nations, including Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Arapaho, Shoshone, Zuni, and Hopi, amongst many others. We must recognize Indigenous people as the original stewards of this land. And as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, remember that the ties these nations still have for their traditional homelands. Let us acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal of the territory and pay our respects to the diverse Indigenous people still connected to this land. Let us also give thanks to all the tribal nations and the ancestors of this place. I would like to welcome and introduce a phenomenal person. Um, Suzi Q. Smith is an award winning artist. She's an activist, she's an educator, and lives in Denver, Colorado. She is also a alumni of CU Denver. She has a collection of poems of gospel, um, a gospel of bones. Sorry. We will, that will be available March 2021. So, yay to that. Um, Suzi, I've been able to meet and work with her, and I think she's an amazing individual. And we look forward to anything that comes from Miss Suzi. So, without further ado, Suzi Smith.
Well, thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. And I'm so glad that you all are here. I'm Suzi Q. Smith, and we're going to talk about poetry today. So, happy Black History Month, especially to those of you who celebrate it every month. So, next month is Women's History Month, and the month after that is National Poetry Month. I occupy all of those spaces all day, every day. So, for me, that's my year. But I love it when other people join me in that celebration intentionally. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you for that beautiful land acknowledgement, too. I'm so glad that we got to start with that. It's really important to understand where we are and whose land we are occupying, right? And honor the original stewards of the place where we are in Denver, Colorado. Particularly at the University of Colorado at Denver and Auraria campus, right? And understanding what that confluence is. And yes, I am a graduate of University of Colorado at Denver. Hey, look at that. So, and I finished as a non-traditional student. I graduated with my bachelor's finally when I was 35 years old. Took me a little time. I started college at 17, finished at 35, and also raised a daughter in the process and built a career in the process. So I see that Natalia has also posted some community agreements here in the chat. I think they were posted before all of you arrived, though. So I want to read through those because I love a community agreement. If you've ever worked with me in any capacity, you know that I love a community agreement. So I want to read those out just to make sure that you all have access to them because we are going to be as interactive as possible today. So the first is I will lean into conversations, which I love because I don't love just talking at people. I like it when we get to dialogue and have some interaction. So I hope we will all lean into conversations. And I'm going to invite you into these community agreements. I hope you will all agree to them. I will believe everyone is doing their best most of the time. I love that. I will critique ideas, not people. I will use I statements. Oh, I love that one. Love that one. I will accept a lack of closure. And I will not make assumptions about other people's identities. I will take care of myself and take breaks if I need to. Absolutely. I will agree that what is shared here stays here and what is learned here leaves here. So I love that. Does anyone have questions, comments, concerns about any of those things before we get into some poetry? Okay. I'm hoping that today I can read you some poems, and then also maybe we'll do a little bit of writing together, right? So I'll give you some prompts and we'll talk about all of these things. So I thought about this talk, thinking about paths through poetry and how poetry has sort of played a huge role in my life, right? A really significant role, and kept me alive in many, many ways, right? But even before I was alive, poetry was already very present in my family. And I realized that I'm very, very privileged in that way, right? My great grandfather was a poet, and I was raised by my grandmother, his daughter, right? My great grandfather was never a widely published poet. He was born Black in Kansas in 1895. So it wasn't a lot of outlet for him because he wasn't, unless you were really like in the Harlem Renaissance in Harlem, right? There weren't a lot of outlets in Kansas City for him to be publishing his poetry. He did publish some things later in life towards the 1960s. But during that time that most of his writing happened and most of his life, he was not publishing. He was writing a lot though. So I inherited that tradition. And my grandmother grew up around in their family. It was very common to be reciting poetry, right? When you think about my grandmother was born in 1930, they didn't have a television, right? It was the Great Depression. What they did was memorize and recite poetry and perform that for each other. So it was very common for me in my childhood to have my grandmother performing and quoting Paul Laurence Dunbar or Countee Cullen or Langston Hughes. Like these were normal things for me to experience. And it's not uncommon at all for me to even now be able to go to my Aunt Sheila and say, "Ooh, Aunt Sheila, will you read this poem?" And she will go off the dome with these poems, right? So I know that I've inherited a beautiful legacy of poetry that made it possible for me to even begin to do what I do. So in addition to it keeping me alive, right, it made a pathway for me to get here in the first place. So I want to start by reading you one of my all-time favorite poems. Probably is my all-time favorite poem, and it is "Won't You Celebrate with Me" by Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And if you don't know that poem, now you do. I highly recommend you get into some Lucille Clifton. That is the type of optimism that I live with. People frequently accuse me of being aggressively optimistic, and it's true. I am aggressively optimistic in that way, right? In that I celebrate every day that something has tried to kill me and has failed. I'm still here. 42, level 42 in this piece, which is really something I'm proud of, right? Because there's so many years that, like, ooh, almost didn't make it. So I'm very, very grateful to have earned this many years, and I hope I get to earn many, many more. So thank you for celebrating with me in this fine Friday afternoon Black History Month. So now I'm going to start by reading you a few of my poems. So as Natalia mentioned, I do have a couple of poetry books coming out this year. One of them is just released and releasing. So some of you might have pre-sale copies. So that means like a few of you might already have a copy. Officially, the book is out next week. So it's called A Gospel of Bones. And the first poem in that book is called "We Pay Cash for Houses," right? So I'm from Denver, Colorado. I was raised in Park Hill. Any Park Hillians in the room? Um, and so this piece is sort of dedicated to the neighborhood I grew up, the Denver I grew up in, as well as the Denver that exists today, right? So sometimes when I tell people I'm from Park Hill, if you don't have the context for Park Hill and what it was in the 1980s, it might puzzle you that I'm from Park Hill because the Park Hill that exists today is entirely different than the Park Hill that existed that I grew up in, right? So it's a very, very different neighborhood now. So this poem is an experiment in contrasting those two neighborhoods, right? And really contrasting the two Denvers, right? Because it's not unique to Park Hill, right? If you're from the east side, if you're from the north side, if you're from the west side, you know all of these things. If you're from Denver at all, if you've lived here for 20 plus years, you have seen that evolution, you have seen this shift, you have seen it change really, really dramatically. And so it is among the more gentrified cities in the nation. And so particularly the 80205. But it's a very, very different city than the one we experienced 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? So I'm going to actually share my screen. I'm so excited I can share my screen. This is one of the best things about Zoom readings is being able to share screen, because sometimes I'm reading poems that are actually doing something like on the page, and I want to be able to show you what it's doing on the page, because I think that that matters occasionally. So I'm going to share with you my screen so that you can actually see the poem that I'm reading. And so this is called We Pay Cash for Houses. The format of this poem, it's called a contrapuntal, which is a term from music, point and counterpoint, right? So I'll show you like sort of how this poem is read. Front yards with grass, old trees and shiny crab apples. Liquor stores here got bulletproof glass. The churches, tattered lighthouses, hold all our secrets. We lost Martin Luther King Boulevard. We hum our shame in moans. Old spirituals shape the bricks, hand-me-down houses. Delicious trees that gossip over fences. Popeye's chicken, church's chicken, laundromat check cashing payday loans. We who know each other's names and borrowed cups of sugar, $20 until payday, just until we get on our feet. And did we not get on our feet? We made this, all of this. We made it. Fresh cut. Clean as first day of school sneakers. Even the mirrors finesse the new banks on the block. Bundles of slow plunder, but the sidewalks ain't cracked no more. The alleyways, smooth as untested promise of former corner store seedlings blooming into downward facing dog. And parks that unwelcome children. Bike lanes and boutique wine bars or family friendly microbreweries. Hear all the scents and sounds conspiring, flooding to the teeth in whispered howls, drowning in hissed welcomes adrift the taunting memory of ground. Air made fat and wet with our breath for you, for you. Front yards with grass, fresh cut. Old trees and shiny crab apples, clean as first day of school sneakers. Liquor stores here got bulletproof glass. Even the mirrors finesse the churches. Tattered lighthouses, the new banks on the block hold all our secrets. Bundles of slow plunder. We lost Martin Luther King Boulevard, but the sidewalks ain't cracked no more. We hum our shame in moans. The alleyways, smooth as untested promise. Old spirituals shape the bricks of former corner store seedlings. Hand-me-down houses blooming into downward facing dog. Delicious trees that gossip over fences and parks that unwelcome children. Popeye's chicken, church's chicken, bike lanes and boutique wine bars, laundromat check cashing payday loans, or family friendly microbreweries. We who know each other's names hear all the scents and sounds conspiring, and borrowed cups of sugar flooding to the teeth in whispered howls. $20 until payday, drowning in hissed welcomes just until we get on our feet, adrift the taunting memory of ground. And did we not get on our feet? Air made fat and wet with our breath. We made this, all of this, for you. We made it for you. So that is an exercise in contrapuntal, point and counterpoint. And I love that I get to show that poem in these readings, right? Because sometimes people look at the poem on paper and they go, how on earth am I even supposed to read this? What is this? I don't know where do I start? So I like being able to demonstrate that. Um, so we can see like, this is basically how a contrapuntal, and of course, that is also me offering you an invitation to write a contrapuntal. Ooh, so we're going to take a second because I want to show you. I'm going to read you a couple more Park Hill poems first, actually, and then we're going to get into a little writing prompt if you guys are good with that, because I want to be able to get in a little bit too. I really got to enjoy writing a bit of form poetry with this book, A Gospel of Bones. And so after we pay cash for houses, it gets into a crown of sonnets, right? And so they are American sonnets, meaning that they still follows a very strict structure of syllable counts, right? And 14 lines. And a crown of sonnets, like the first line basically leads, the last line of one poem is the first line of the next, right? And you have a series of 14 poems that go that way. So it is still a pretty specific structure, but it doesn't necessarily follow a rhyme structure and also there, where exactly the volta has to go. There are some specific rules around that that are a little bit different. If you want to learn more about the American sonnet, I would recommend reading Wanda Coleman and Terrence Hayes. They're two people who have done a lot of work in that area. But I have this crown of sonnets that is, and many of these are also related to place and the place that shaped me. So, and then we'll pause and have some brief little discussion because I love it when we get to chat. So the crown is called This Crown Crooked Anyway, and I'll just read a few of those to begin. So the first one in the series, the rapture came in the early 90s. At church, they used to take the kids into the basement to show us poor made horror movies on the rapture, remind us we don't want to be the ones they leave, and Jesus only wants the well behaved. So when the kids around you start to disappear, you better pray and get right with the Lord. And baby, would you believe it? Other kids began to slip off into Jesus' arms. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. You heard about the boy whose clothes were always dirty, flashed a gun all over seventh grade and disappeared. I'm saying, you act like you don't see these empty seats. I pray until my knees bruise, my knuckles tight glowing. I'm singing Pass Me Not on my way back home from school. Two, find a sweet relief. I'm still singing Pass Me Not on my way back home from school. The walk is long, an exercise in faith and violence. I tuck my chin, quick my pace, try not to be a target. Who got time to be someone's victim? Anybody, or anyway. I've never been in a fight I wasn't dragged away from. This is not to say that I won them, just that violence is a language I have learned, inherited, and practiced. A mother tongue always lies dormant in my mouth and blood. Stop all that before I give you something to cry about. One time, me and Genevieve fought Quentin on the same day. I got up bloody again and then again, wild swinging, knowing the only one coming to save me is Jesus. What if I'm my only hero? What if you are yours? You ever snatch your breath out the mouth of a barking dog? Three, they called it the summer of violence. You ever snatch your breath out the mouth of a barking dog? We grew up in the 80s, back when our blocks were still ours. White flight had left the guts of cities to our grandparents. There was a war on drugs. Nancy Reagan was on TV. We lived with our grandmother and we wore hand me down clothes. Used to brag about my wealthy father like I knew him, pretend like I ain't have to share a bed with my cousin. We were royal ancient children. We were at risk youth. We were young lords of flies, wrestling our fate and future inheritance from statistics. We learned to steal ourselves. Do you remember the summer of 1993, when the boys that we all used to know became murderers, when all the girls began to know we would become widows? Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war. And I'm going to pause there after that third sonnet because they're very specific around Denver and Park Hill and the neighborhood I inherited and those experiences. Any questions, comments, concerns? You can feel free to ask me in the chat or unmute. I'd even be happy to see your faces if you want. No requirement on that, but
That that was amazing, and um, I it painted a picture for me. And I remember growing up in Park Hill around that time, um, and yeah, I'm moved right now. Thank you.
well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, if you were in Park Hill or even like, in any major city in that early 90s when the gangway was strong and the war on drugs was heated, right? And so a lot of people in our communities disappeared and many of them did not return. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Are you ready to do some writing of your own? I think that we should. I would love that. So I'm going to share my screen because I made you a slideshow. Yeah, I did.
Miss Susie, I think
Oh, is there a question?
someone had something.
Let me stop that share then. Yes. Okay. What is the question? Is it in the chat? I don't see.
Is it Miss Shamela?
Oh, yeah. Actually, just a comment. I mean, it wasn't important, but I just wanted to say I'm so happy to meet your poetry with you reading, and not just like for 2 minutes at a conference. And our backstory is so different, and yet I find it triggering. Like, I'm normally fiction, but and I write some poetry, but not a lot. But it's like, oh, that could be put into a poem, and that could be put into a poem, and it's a great blessing to have that. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
It's wonderful work.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. I'm glad to hear it. And I hope that it inspires you into your own writing, because I think a lot of these things are actually very related. I write poetry mostly, but I also write some memoir and a little bit of fiction. And then I teach a little bit of creative nonfiction, and I teach a lot of different types of writing. So I think that they're all very much related. Of course, I always argue with my students that poetry is the foundational language of all other types of creative writing. Because I'm biased, because I'm a poet. I'm like, we're going to do poetry first. And poetry is what gives rise to all the rest of them, right? It's going to give every other type of writing its flavor. You got to give it that seasoning, right?
Yes.
We do that in poetry. And that's if you want to master figurative language, right? That's where we root that in. So it begins with poetry. If you can write poetry, you can take that into a lot of other kinds of writing, right? And add some flavor. However, it's not all the way true, right? Because I've just was recently on Twitter joking with a lot of poet friends. All of us who are working in prose projects right now, it takes us 10 years to write any sort of, to write one chapter, because we're so meticulous with every word. It just, takes us forever to actually make progress. So but that's all right. I'm gonna take my time with it. But I keep saying, oh yes, well, this is the year the memoir gets finished. And then the next year comes and I say, no, this is the year. No, this is the year. And now I've just accepted, like, look, it's gonna be done when it's done. And I'm gonna not rush it. It's fine. It's just gonna be, like cooking collard greens. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to rush that. It's worth the wait. It'll be right when it's right. It's ready when it's ready. And then it's better the next day, right? Some things need that little time to really,
Yes.
you know, fermentation has some power to it, right? Adds a little extra complexity. So I'm not rushing my projects anymore. Um, and Danielle, yes, do you have a question?
Yes, that's me. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Poetry has been an inspiration of mine since I was a young girl, and you're just a wonderful artist, wonderful poet. Um, there was a part in your poem where you mentioned I'm a 90s baby, not an 80s baby, but you mentioned that you said we stole ourselves. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? That really spoke to me in a certain way, and I just want to know how that spoke to you.
I love that you picked up on that line, because I've never heard it that way. I said we learn to steal ourselves. And when I say that line, it's actually spelled steal, um, as in weaponry,
Oh,
as in, but I love that. Oh, hearing it now, like, oh, that's interesting too. But I think it also does work both ways, that we steal ourselves and steal ourselves in both ways. It was a time in the early 90s when many of the youth of Park Hill and the east side and the north side and the west side of pretty much every city um, in the US, young people were stealing themselves, right? In a lot of different ways, which is like developing some type of armor, whether that's literal or figurative, right? And in many cases, both. Um, Young people were stealing themselves. And in that way, also stealing themselves, and also as a consequence, being stolen, right? And so that is sort of that reference to the rapture, right? When there are all of these people around you, and then suddenly a bunch of them gone, either being swallowed up behind some steel bars, or swallowed up by the earth. So many people that we grew up with are not anymore, right? So I'll get into a few more of those sonnets in a little bit, that
Thank
kind of
you. Yeah,
go
that was
through the
beautiful.
journey.
That's how I interpreted when I heard it. But yes, that's
Thank you.
still or still
I'm so
EEL
glad that you heard it
EAL.
that way, though, because I had never considered it STEAL. I always thought of it as STEEL, but in reading it out loud, I'm like, oh, but I like it both ways, because both are true. In fact, both are true. So I'm glad that you asked that question. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into a little bit of writing together, because I've told you a little bit about where I am from, but I'm hoping you will do a little bit of writing on the place that made you, or the places, right? Some of us have been made by many places, right? So my question for you to begin, right, is to imagine a landscape that you've inherited. and to jot down what are its significant features and traits, and especially what are some sensory experiences of that place, right? So smells that take you right back, right? Sounds, right? What sounds you expect when you open your front door, either going out or coming back in, or both, right? Like what sounds are present on your block, what sounds are present in your home. Um, what tastes send you immediately back to like the places you associate yourself being raised in? What are images that you immediately associate with the place that shaped you, right? What are some things you see? Like I know for sure if I see a picture of City Park, I'm home right away. If I see a picture of the mountains, right, with like the little downtown Denver profile, I'm like, yep, that's it. Immediately I know where I am. I know where I'm from. Like that's home for sure, right? But also pictures of my block that I could see, like all of that would be immediately home for me. What textures, temperatures, climates, and moods would you use to describe it, right? So those are my first questions for you. And my next question is also, how has it changed, right? From the place that made you, how was it then? How is it now? What role does power play in the changes you've experienced? And how much of that power belongs to you? So these are my questions for you. I'm going to copy these prompts and paste them into our chat to make it easier for you if you would like to copy them into like another document of some kind, you know? If it's going to let me, I might have to stop sharing for a second. I'm sorry. There we go. Ooh. Mm-hmm. There it is. There are those questions if you would like to copy them into a document or keep them for future reference. In the meantime, I'll go back to sharing my screen and I'll give us, let's say like 7 minutes to write on this. Does that sound like enough time? I don't want to overwhelm anyone. We'll take, yeah, okay, let's take until 4:40. We'll come back together. All right, beautiful. I'm going to share this screen, this slide with you again. us back with some gentle music. You'll start wrapping up where you are. Start making our way back in. Hey, everybody. And now here we are, back together again. I realized I was going to read you 100 poems today, and I've read you maybe 3 short ones. And it's already 4:40. And of course, I don't want to keep you all too long because being on Zoom too much, it's not great for our brains. So there are some great things about Zoom, like being able to share screen. It's very, very handy. And it allows me to do some different things with poems. However, I miss being able to see you all. I miss being able to get in the same room sometimes and sign books and chat. And, I had a former student come into my classroom the other day, and we just stood there 6 feet apart looking at each other, just wanting to hug so bad. Like, oh, miss you so much. Just had to, we finally settled on an elbow bump, and that was as good as we could get. Um, but hopefully these times are coming to a shift and we'll be able to be in each other's space again, intentionally, here in the coming months, I hope. But welcome back. I hope you've done some writing that you enjoy. If you would like to keep working on this again, those prompts are all in the chat. And I'm going to read you a couple more poems if that's cool. And they aren't the poems that I thought I was going to read you, but they are the ones that I think we're going to do today. So, yeah, it always changes. I always write like really detailed lists of things that are going to happen. And then that's not what ends up happening, right? But as we start kind of processing, I mean, I think sometimes people, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the personal versus political, because I think that they're not verses for me. People always ask like about, like they call me like a social justice poet or whatever the move is, or all these things. Like these things are true all the time, right? I'm a deeply feeling person, which is why I'm an artist, which is why I'm an educator, which is why I'm an activist. They're all the same thing. And there's never a time when I'm not doing those things, right? Like I'm always that. Um, and my personal lived experience informs my politics. I was politicized before I was ever born, right? Other people politicized my identity before I was born, right? People have been asking me, what are you since, since, okay? And up until last week, you know what I mean? Like, so it's still, other people have been politicizing my identity since before. So just being here on this planet and in this country and occupying this body has been political, right? Everything I experience is. So a lot of that shapes it. So I think I'm going to keep on with a couple more of these sonnets, and then maybe I'll do maybe a little bit of a longer piece, if that's cool. Yeah. Are we back? Are we with that? Okay. So I'll read you a little bit more of the sonnet series, right? So we just ended with summer of 1993, right? We called that the summer of violence, is what it was well known as in Denver, Colorado. I will continue from there. So the fourth sonnet in the series is called The Blister in Our Mother Tongue. Blessed be the Lord, my strength, which teacheth my hands to war. Even children know how to light fires around here, to gather tinder, flint, kindling. Is that power? Will it make us safer? Will it keep our skin close? You ever tried to sing or wail a wall into the ground? Understand the pitch and force required to smash a window? Considered what you know about kerosene and rags? Haven't you ever damn near swallowed someone's knuckles? Ain't had to pinch the bridge of your nose back into shape? Smiled bloody, said fine before the scabs are even dry? Haven't you ever had to ball your fists and swing? Isn't everything we dream an act of self-defense? Haven't you had your body colonized? Don't you start no fights, but best believe you can finish them. 5. Pretty is as pretty does. Don't you start no fights, but best believe you can finish them. Didn't my mother's quilting teach me something about needles? What do I know of womanhood but ripping seams and stitches? Haven't I learned and taught how to divorce myself from myself? Don't I know better than to drink with the eyes of hungry men? Haven't I always haunted my tentative, gentle body, spreading, making some kind of home in this quarantine trigger, sutured and scarred from the survived sacrifice? See what I made? With the ashes and the hammers I keep under my pillow. I smear these ghosts all over my plump lips. Tell me it's pretty. What's the difference between a stomach and a heart anyway? I still don't know enough about hands to wear them correctly. Sometimes I treat my buttery flesh like I'm just passing through. After all, doesn't every place I go ask me where I'm from? 6. My address is an asterisk. I mean, doesn't every place I go ask me where I'm from, as in, when will I be going back wherever that is? And called me exotic, like the word is a compliment, not a one way ticket back to some place they haven't been. Aren't I always the guest invited tentatively? Isn't my name placed in italics and parentheses? Surely I have known a home and will mourn its erasure, which is, of course, hearing my Nana play the piano and Aunt Dee out front honking the horn of her Cadillac. It's true. All of the places that knew me are disappearing as fast as the people, but I ask, for whom shall I weep? You, for losing something you never knew was not yours, or for me, who never bothered to pretend it was mine? Do not forget where you come from. Remember who you are. 7. Sometimes they put your family in cages. Forget where you come from. Remember who you are. My little cousin calls on a Wednesday evening, and I apologize for missing his court date. But Nana was in the hospital, and he says, "Thank you for the money on my books." And I say, "Your grandma's doing better since the heart attack." He asks if I will tell everyone he loves them. He asks if Nana's still mad about his tattoos. The DA offered him 40 years if he pleads. He didn't even do it, but he'll take 20 if he can see his son again before he's grown. He asks, "When I was little, did you ever think I would end up here?" Our anchored blood pours heavy when love is our only home and a mudslide too. 8. Middle age might as well be paradise. When love is our only home and a mudslide too, we dance and drown and bury ourselves in fistfuls. Melvin got shot while driving his El Camino on the same afternoon as my bridal shower. He survived, was still a groomsman in our wedding. Tariq didn't get his tux in time, but he still came to the reception looking clean as ever. A few years later, he was killed at his front door. Russ is skinny, but the cancer's in remission. Maybe it was prayer, or maybe the chicken broth. His belly almost looks like a place I once knew. Dear God, I love seeing men I have loved get old and grouchy, complain about new trends in hip hop. Yes, I love the sweet silver whiskers in your beards. And I'll stop there to see if you have any questions, comments, concerns about any of that.
I think it was number 6. I just didn't catch the end of it. It was really powerful to me. It said losing something that you never knew was not yours, or
Yes.
me for, and if you finish that,
Oh, me for never bothering to pretend it was mine. Um,
never let go.
And that is a pretty specific reference to Denver, Colorado. Even though it is the city I have occupied for my whole life, I have always been asked where I'm from when I am here, as if it is not a place that could ever belong to me, nor I could belong to, right? So I think that there has been a certain sense of displacement always here in this city. And so it is an interesting, I think that when I watch a lot of people get really, really um, upset about a lot of the changes in that sense of loss around the city changing, um, I think my feelings are a little bit different, where I do sense that loss, but the loss occurred for me much sooner, right? And so I think I've always been reminded that none of this is yours, right? So I think that that's observing other people kind of go through that experience is like, oh, right, I never, right? Watching, I lived 2 blocks away from my middle school as they were tearing it down, and watching it be demolished little by little every day going past it was such an interesting experience, right? Because middle school is generally awful, right? And so
Hmm.
as I'm like seeing different pieces of the building come down, I'm like, oh, that's right? Like they're like, that's where I got in that fight, or that's where this thing happened, or that's where this horrible thing happened, or this horrible thing happened. And it's a series of mostly awful memories, right? But they're still my memories. And watching them get dismantled in this way was very, very strange. And there was a there was some victory in it, even also like, you know what, yeah, let that go. And then also there was like, but that's mine, right? And I think that's kind of been my process of like watching a lot of the shift. where, but it's always been that way, right? I don't think there was ever a steady, ever felt like there was a steady place to necessarily claim, other than the beloved people here who have always made this my home, right?
So,
Which of course is why I live here.
how does that translate into how you take ownership of things
Mhm.
and like within your personal life and everything else like that? How does that translate into that?
I have to get very, very comfortable with, I think we think about the Buddhist practice of non-attachment, right? I think I have to get very comfortable with non-attachment. And I don't know that I have the illusion of that sense of control or ownership, right? I think that I do my best to own my body and myself and my impact on people and their impact on me. I do my best to own my relationships and my time and those boundaries. But when it comes to like owning land, I mean, you know, we'll see. I do have a mortgage. I have a mortgage. So technically I own a home, but really the bank owns this home. And they will continue to for a long time. So, as far as ownership, right? And again, of course, we are occupying the land of the Ute, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. So, um, who owns what?
Right. Thank you.
So that I think is probably my sense of ownership and what that means. I think that, but this is still very much home, right? And I love this city, particularly because of the people who are here. Um, and this is still the place that made me, the place that raised me, right? And I still think that this landscape of Denver, Colorado, is beautiful, right? It's a very beautiful city, a very beautiful place to be. And I feel very privileged to have been born here and to have lived here all of this time. I just don't feel like I own it, I feel like I get to exist with it, and I'm grateful that I get to. But it's home because of the people, and I'm very, very fortunate to love and be loved by many people here. And I think there's a beautiful spirit in a lot of the people here in this city, and because of its um, demographics, right, it kind of has forced us in places, like all of us who live on the margins, to really work together, to collaborate, to love each other, right, to support each other. And it really creates a lot of opportunities to build community, and out of necessity, right, and communities of care um, that exist, that aren't necessarily everywhere, right? So there's a lot of really wonderful things that have made Denver a beautiful home and a beautiful place for me to grow and evolve as an artist, for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments,
You
concerns?
had a line that said colonize. I don't remember the whole thing.
Oh, haven't you ever had your body colonized?
That some of the participants here are in a women of color feminism class, and we're talking about the colonization of bodies. And uh, your narrative with that, I think, is something that we needed to hear, something that we can understand and relate to, because it's not just in a book or a journal article like for class. So that was really impactful. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Having your body colonized is common for some of us, right? And getting into a place where you learn to live in your body, claim your body as something that belongs to you, that's home enough. Because many of us, it takes a lifetime to do that, and to be able to say, oh, wait, is this mine? This belongs to me? What? You don't say. I don't think I really got there till I was a good 41. Yeah. So it took me a minute to fully own this place that I live in, right? Because ownership of it was removed from me so early, right? And then those continual messages and violence, right? When you consider, violence, trauma, and overall messaging, images, etc., right? Like and I think being born in a lot of ways, right? There are just so many different reasons why people might I don't know if like there's really a single person in the world whose body is 100% affirmed all the time, every day, right? Oh, you look like how you're supposed to look, right? I don't think there's anybody who has that experience, actually, because there's too much money to be made off of people not feeling comfortable and confident in their bodies as if they're the way that they're supposed to be, right? No matter who you are. So, um, but I think some of us experience that more deeply than others, right? And some of us are just, simply much more vulnerable to the painful messages and also to literal violence, right? And colonization of a body. And some of us experience that more specifically and directly and immediately than others. Okay, we have a few more minutes, and I'm hoping I'm going to read one more poem, and then I'm going to give you one more prompt, if that's cool. So this poem that I want to read to you now is not from Gospel of Bones. This is from the next book, um, Poems for the End of the World, and that comes out in June. And the piece is called "We Sang Ourselves Free," and it's about sort of an imagined liberated future, and it brings me joy. And I want to end on that note of envisioning that liberated future together. And so we're going to get into that. So we sang ourselves free. We didn't always know we would win, just that we would do whatever we had to in order to get free. We used to sing softly to each other, to ourselves, hum low under our breath to remember our voices in places we were unwelcome. We danced in secret. We laughed silently across rooms, taking our quiet joys and tucking them into our pockets like perfumed handkerchiefs we could smell later when we needed to remember. One day, we saw the first rose bloom in years when we sang the low notes we'd been singing since before time had a name. We got louder. More people joined in the song, and the grasses awoke from their slumber. The wolves came and sat at our feet, weeping. The rains came down, and the trees remembered us. We began again and we knew God was listening. And the rains came the way they come, slow and sweet at first, washing the old ash and dust to the rivers. Then again, there were rivers where we washed our hands and feet, where we washed each other's hair, where we sang old songs and the earth heard answering in heather and pine. And she answered in the day's harvest, yellows spiraling into violets, sweets wrapping themselves in spicy oranges and fuchsias tumbling over each other to embrace the sour and soft fruit of each other. We ate and grew fat again. We all fell madly in love and raised perfect children, the sort of perfect that brought us into each day laughing. We grinned rich as noonday, each of us carrying the songs and teaching them to the children how to stretch a note all the way into fingertips until the trees begin to sway. You feel that? We said to each other, our hairs standing to answer the electric air. Yes, we all answered. Yes. And that is, we sang ourselves free. And now, of course, I want to share with you a slide because I'm hoping that you will do a little bit of writing before we go. So let's take the next 3 minutes. And then if you got to go, I understand. I can hang out for a little bit longer. Um, but I'm going to share this screen with you. So at least you have the prompt, right? So I'm going to bring it up because this is, and I'm also going to copy it, paste it in the chat first so that you have it here. Because I love being in community and imagining liberated futures with people. So those are the prompts. I'm going to share my screen and bring that up so you can see those, right? And so the goal is to imagine yourself in the future, right? And being in community after we've built a world we're proud of. So what is your revolutionary vision for the best possible outcome for the future? Picture yourself as an elder, right? And visualize yourself in this life. So my questions are, how do you feel being there in this beautifully liberated future, in this victorious future? How are you the same? How have you changed? Where are you? Who are you with? Who will you be when you are fully free? And how do you know for sure that you are there? And the ultimate goal of this piece, right? Once you've really visualized this, which I know is impossible in 3 minutes, but to visualize the journey to the world you're proud of, right? And once you're there, look back. How would you tell this story to the children? So when you're at that point where you know you're going to win, when you see finally it's possible, finally we're here, you know it's unstoppable, write the story of that moment as if you're telling it to children listening at your feet. On that note, I'm going to hush. We're going to take a couple of minutes and I want to see if you can write a little bit about it. And I'm realizing it's time. It's 5 o'clock. I don't want to keep you beyond the time that you've agreed to be here.
Just a little housekeeping before everyone goes. Keep writing. Um, we want to thank Miss Susie for coming. Um, Amazing as usual. If you are here for extra credit, please send me a message in the chat privately so that you can get credit for that. Thank you all for attending, um, and be blessed. Go in patience and kindness.
Thank you all for being here. And thank you for having me, Natalia. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that you enjoy these prompts and get into some more writing on liberated futures. Bye, everyone.
Miss Susie,
Yes.
I had a question. Because I'm just now getting back into writing and everything like that a little bit more than what I had been doing for years. And what I'm finding myself struggle with is I never force anything as far as like me actually just sitting down and like writing a poem all the way out. I'm more so like it comes to me in the pieces, but those pieces could be days, weeks, months, sometimes years apart. So I have what seems like a lot of unfinished poems. And I'm just wondering, how do you get to a place to where you feel like that poem is finished
Mm.
and or just get to a place to where you can complete that poem?
Ooh, those are good questions. So two answers. One, poems are never finished, only abandoned, right? You finally say, as is done as it's going to get. Because I mean, I will go through these books that are now in print and make edits if they would let me. Be like, you know what, I want to change this line. You know what, I want to switch this up. There's little. So at some point, you just have to let go and say, this is how it goes, and this is where it's at. Um, but ultimately, it really comes down to a practice, staying in a writing practice, right? And writing as regularly, whatever your practice is, like know what works for you, whether it's an early morning practice, a late night practice, 5 minutes while you sip some tea, right? It doesn't have to be hours and hours dedicated, right, to a writing practice. Or it might be, right? Maybe there's one day a week that you like, okay, this is 4 hours of Sunday. That's all I'm doing. Nobody bother me between the hours of 3 and 7. That's it. I'm writing. You know what I mean? Like whatever your practice is, whatever time you can guard, right? And mine shifts depending on what's going on in my life. Sometimes it just means like I'm going to sit here on this porch with this cup of tea for 10 minutes, and this is when my writing happens. And that's my daily writing practice, right? It's that 10 minutes while I sip my tea, sitting on the porch and just listening to what's going on around me or whatever that is. Because sometimes it gets hectic and crazy, and 10 minutes is all I can grab, right? But